There are some secrets that change you so completely, you can't remember who you were before them. I'm 55 years old now, and for the last 18 years, I've carried something that no man should carry. I've told no one. Not my ex-wife, not my daughter, not the few friends I had before I retreated so far into these woods that I became more shadow than man. But I'm telling you now, because I think I'm finally ready to let it go. Or maybe because I know I'm dying and this thing, this terrible, beautiful thing, deserves to be known before I'm gone. My name is John Kellerman, and I fed a Wendigo for 18 years. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking about the stories, the legends, the campfire tales told by drunk hunters trying to scare each other in the dark. You're thinking it's impossible, that creatures like that don't exist, that I'm either lying or I've lost my mind out here in the isolation. I thought the same thing once. I was a rational man, a forest ranger for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, a man who believed in what he could see and touch and measure. I believed in black bears and gray wolves, in the harsh mathematics of winter survival, in the simple cruelty of nature that needs no monsters to be terrifying. That was before the winter of 2006. I'd been living alone for 3 years by then, after Sarah took Emily and left. Can't say I blamed her. The job had consumed me, those endless patrols through hundreds of square miles of forest, the isolation that seeps into your bones like cold water. She said I'd become a ghost in my own house, that I loved the trees more than I loved my family. She wasn't wrong. After they left, I requested a permanent posting at the most remote station available, a territory so far north that my nearest neighbor was 12 miles away, where the forest was so deep and old that it felt like stepping back through time. The cabin they gave me was small, built in the 30s by the Civilian Conservation Corps, all rough-hewn logs and a stone fireplace that drew poorly. But it was mine, and it sat on 40 acres of land that backed up against thousands more of federal wilderness. I had a generator, a shortwave radio, and enough solitude to finally hear myself think. Or stop thinking. I wasn't sure which I wanted more. I fell into a routine quickly. Wake before dawn, check the trap lines for the wildlife surveys we were conducting, patrol the forest roads and trails, mark the movements of the wolf packs we were tracking. The work was solitary, methodical, and exactly what I needed. By evening, I'd return to the cabin, heat up something simple on the propane stove, and sit by the fire with a book or the radio, letting the darkness press against the windows like a living thing. It was a good life in its way. Simple. Honest. Lonely as hell. The winter that year came early and hard. By mid-November, we already had 2 feet of snow, and the temperatures were dropping into the -20s at night. The wolves were restless, their howls echoing through the frozen air like lost souls. I'd been tracking a particular pack for weeks, studying their movements, trying to understand why they kept circling back to a section of forest about 3 miles northwest of my cabin. It wasn't usual behavior. Wolves are efficient hunters. They follow the game, and that winter, the deer had moved south to find easier forage. But this pack kept returning to the same area, night after night, their tracks crisscrossing the snow in patterns that suggested agitation, maybe even fear. On December 3rd, I decided to investigate. The forest that morning was absolutely still, the kind of stillness that only comes in deep cold, when even the wind seems to freeze. My breath crystallized in front of my face, and the snow crunched under my boots with a sound like breaking bones. I followed the wolf tracks deeper into the territory, noting how they circled and doubled back, how they avoided a particular ravine even though it would have been the natural path through the terrain. That's when I smelled it. It wasn't death exactly, though there was something of that in it. It was older, wilder, like rot mixed with musk and something else I couldn't name. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up and my hand move instinctively to the rifle slung across my shoulder. I'd smelled a lot of things in my years in the forest. Decomposing elk, bear dens, the acrid scent of fear from wounded animals. But this was different. This was wrong. I found the pit 20 minutes later. It was an old trap, probably dug by illegal hunters decades ago, about 15 feet deep and covered with rotted planks that had finally given way. The snow had drifted over it partially, but I could see where something had fallen through, could see the deep gouges in the frozen earth where it had tried to climb out. And at the bottom, curled against the western wall where the winter sun never reached, was something that stopped my heart. At first, I thought it was a bear. The size was right, and in the shadows I could make out a mass of dark fur or hair, the curve of what might have been a back. But as my eyes adjusted, as I took a careful step closer to the edge and looked down, I saw that it wasn't a bear at all. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. The creature was impossibly thin, its body all sharp angles and elongated limbs, covered in patchy gray-brown fur matted with ice and dried blood. Its spine curved in a way that suggested both human and animal postures, and its hands, its hands, were long-fingered and tipped with black claws that had dug furrows in the frozen earth. But it was the head that truly unmade me. The skull was stretched, almost elongated, with a jaw that seemed too large for the face, and though its eyes were closed, I could see the deep sockets, the prominent ridgeline of the brow. It was breathing. Shallow, rasping breaths that misted in the cold air. I should have left. Every instinct I had, every year of training and experience, told me to back away slowly, to get on the radio and call it in, to let someone else deal with whatever impossible thing lay at the bottom of that pit. But I didn't move. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, watching it breathe, watching the slow rise and fall of its ribcage beneath the matted fur. And then it opened its eyes. They were yellow, pale as winter sun through ice, and they fixed on me with an intelligence that was unmistakably human. Not animal. Human. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but in that moment of connection, I felt something pass between us, a recognition, maybe, or a plea. I don't know. But I couldn't look away. That was my first mistake. The first of many. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the cabin with my rifle across my knees, staring at the fire and trying to convince myself that what I'd seen wasn't real. That it was a bear or a wolf, or some poor animal deformed by disease or starvation. That those eyes hadn't looked at me with human awareness, hadn't held something that felt uncomfortably like understanding. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again, that impossible creature at the bottom of the pit, dying slowly in the cold. By dawn, I'd made a decision I still can't fully explain. I loaded a pack with supplies, dried meat, some old venison from my freezer, a rope, a tarp, and hiked back through the pre-dawn darkness to the pit. The temperature had dropped even further overnight, down to 30 below, and I knew that if the creature was still alive, it wouldn't be for much longer. The cold up here doesn't give second chances. When I reached the edge and looked down, it was exactly where I'd left it, still curled against that western wall. But its eyes were open now, watching me, and when I appeared at the rim of the pit, something changed in its expression. Not hope exactly, but a kind of awful anticipation. I should explain something here. I've thought about this moment 10,000 times since then, tried to understand what made me do what I did next. Was it compassion? Curiosity? Some kind of madness brought on by too many years alone? I don't have a good answer. All I know is that I looked at that creature, that impossible thing that should have terrified me, and I saw something suffering. Something aware of its own suffering. And I couldn't walk away. I tied the rope to a sturdy pine and lowered down a bundle wrapped in the tarp, about 10 pounds of frozen venison. I didn't climb down. Wasn't that stupid? I just lowered it until it rested on the floor of the pit, maybe 6 feet from where the creature lay, and then I backed away and waited. For a long time, nothing happened. The creature didn't move, just kept watching me with those pale yellow eyes. Then, slowly, so slowly I almost missed it, it began to unfold itself from its huddled position. The movement was painful to watch, all sharp angles and trembling limbs, like something that had been broken and badly healed. When it finally reached the bundle and tore into the tarp with those black claws, the sound it made was almost a sob. It ate like something that had been starving for a very long time. Not with the desperate frenzy of an animal, but with a terrible conscious hunger that somehow seemed worse. And when it was done, when nothing remained but scraps of hide and bone, it looked up at me again, and I swear to God it nodded. Just once. A gesture of acknowledgement, maybe gratitude, that was so human it made my chest tight. That's when it spoke. The voice was like wind through dead trees, like ice cracking on a frozen lake, but beneath all that I could hear words. Actual words, shaped with effort and pain. More, it said. Just that one word, but it was enough to make me stumble backward from the edge of the pit, my heart hammering against my ribs. I should have run then. Should have radioed for help. Should have done 100 things differently. But I didn't. Instead, I heard myself say, "Tomorrow. I'll come back tomorrow." And I did. For weeks, I returned every day with food, venison, elk I shot specifically for this purpose, sometimes rabbits or birds. The creature ate everything I brought, and slowly, I watched it grow stronger. The trembling stopped. The matted fur began to fill out. It could stand now, could move around the pit with a grace that was disturbing in something so large and wrong. And it talked. Not much at first, just a word here and there, each one seeming to cost it tremendous effort. But as the winter deepened and the feedings continued, the words came easier, formed into sentences, into thoughts that were coherent and terrible. It told me it had been in the pit for 3 months before I found it, that it had fallen through while hunting, while following the scent of something it needed but couldn't name. It told me about hunger. Not the simple hunger of an empty stomach, but something deeper, more profound. A hunger that was spiritual, existential, that consumed not just the body but the mind and soul. It described what it was like to feel that hunger growing inside you, changing you, until you weren't sure where the hunger ended and you began. The Wendigo is not born, it said one gray afternoon, its voice stronger now, almost conversational. The Wendigo is made. Made from men who crossed a line they didn't know existed. Made from hunger that became all they were. I asked it if it had been a man once. The silence that followed was long enough that I thought it wouldn't answer. Then, yes. Long ago. So long I barely remember his name. Samuel. He was called Samuel. What happened? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Winter. 1897. I was trapping the far north territories with 2 partners. The snow came early, trapped us in the high country. Food ran out. Game disappeared. We drew lots. The creature's voice was flat, emotionless, but I could hear something underneath. Not quite regret, but close to it. I drew the short stick. Was supposed to be me they ate. But I ran. Ran until I found them weeks later, starved and frozen. And I was so hungry. So hungry I didn't think. I just ate. I felt sick. And that's what changed you. No. That's what started it. The change took years. Happened so slowly I didn't notice until it was too late. Until I looked at my reflection in a frozen stream and saw this instead of a man. Over the following weeks it told me more. About the decades of wandering, of trying to control the hunger, of the terrible things it had done when control failed. About watching the world change around it, the forests shrinking, towns growing, the wilderness becoming smaller and more managed. About hunters who sometimes glimpsed it and spread stories. About the growing difficulty of remaining hidden. Why are you telling me this? I asked once. Because you feed me. Because you come back. Because for the first time in 100 years, someone sees me and doesn't run. A pause. Because I'm tired of being alone. And that's when I understood, really understood, what I'd gotten myself into. This wasn't just about feeding a creature, about keeping a secret. This was about connection, about 2 broken, isolated things finding each other in the wilderness. I'd been alone for so long, had pushed everyone away so completely, that I'd befriended a monster rather than admit I needed someone to talk to. By February, I'd rigged a system with a rope and pulleys to lower larger quantities of food. The creature, I still thought of it as it, though I sometimes caught myself thinking of Samuel, the man it had been, had grown significantly stronger. It could leap almost to the rim of the pit now, its powerful legs driving it up in a single fluid motion before gravity pulled it back down. I started to worry that it might escape on its own, and I wasn't sure how I felt about that. One night, during a particularly brutal blizzard, I heard howling from the direction of the pit. Not wolf howls. I knew those intimately. This was different, more purposeful, almost like words shaped into sound. I bundled up and made my way through the storm with a powerful flashlight and my rifle. When I reached the pit, the creature was standing in the center, looking up at the sky as snow poured down. Its arms were raised, and the sound coming from it was something between a song and a scream, something ancient and inhuman that made my bones ache. What are you doing?" I shouted over the wind. It looked at me, and for the first time I saw something like joy in its face. Singing. I haven't sung in so long. The storm makes me remember. Makes me feel alive. I stood there in the freezing wind, listening to this creature sing, and I realized with a strange clarity that I was further from civilization than I'd ever been, in every sense of the word. And I didn't want to go back. Spring came late that year, and with it came trouble. I'd gotten careless, I suppose. After months of daily visits to the pit, I'd stopped being as vigilant about covering my tracks. The snow had hidden the path worn through the forest, but as the thaw began, that path became obvious, a clear trail leading from my cabin deep into the restricted territory. And people started noticing. The first was Tom Erickson, a local hunter who'd been working these woods longer than I'd been alive. He showed up at my cabin on a warm April morning, his truck muddy from the spring runoff, his expression troubled. "John, we need to talk," he said, not waiting for an invitation before stepping inside. "I've been seeing some strange things out by the northwestern ravines. Tracks that don't make sense. Sounds at night. And I followed your trail out there yesterday." My blood went cold. "It's just research. Wildlife surveys." "Bullshit." He looked at me hard. "I've known you for 5 years, John. You're a good ranger, a straight shooter. But something's going on. The wolves won't go near that area anymore. The game's all wrong. And there's a smell." He trailed off, shaking his head. "I'm not saying you're doing anything illegal. But people are starting to talk." After he left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, weighing my options. I could report the creature, call in the authorities, let them handle it. It would mean the end of everything. Investigations, media attention, the creature poked and prodded and studied like a lab specimen. Or worse, killed. Destroyed as a threat. Or I could keep the secret. But Tom's visit made it clear that secrets this big don't stay hidden forever. That afternoon, I went to the pit with a different purpose. I needed to talk to Samuel. I'd started using the name regularly now, had stopped thinking of it as just a creature. When I arrived, it was sitting at the bottom in a shaft of spring sunlight, the first direct sun it had felt in months. It looked almost peaceful. "We have a problem," I said, and explained about Tom's visit. Samuel listened without interruption, then said quietly, "You should have let me die in the winter. Would have been easier." I couldn't. Why not? It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself countless times. Because you were suffering. Because you asked for help. Because. I stopped, searching for the right words. Because everyone deserves compassion, even if they don't deserve forgiveness. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "You're a strange man, John Kellerman. Most humans I've known would have killed me without hesitation. Or run screaming. But you fed me. Talked to me. Treated me like I was still human. Are you still human?" I don't know. I remember being human. I remember Samuel. But I've been this for so long, I'm not sure where one ends and the other begins. It looked up at me. "What will you do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But we're running out of time. If more people come looking, if they find you." "Then let me go." "What?" "Pull me out of this pit. Let me run. I can disappear into the deep wilderness. Places even rangers don't go. I've done it before. I can do it again." I stood there torn. Releasing it felt like a betrayal of everything I'd sworn to protect. The people who lived in these woods, the balance of nature, the laws I'd enforced for 20 years. But leaving it to be discovered felt worse. Felt like a betrayal of something more fundamental. Trust, maybe. Or just basic humanity. "If I let you go, you have to promise me something," I said finally. "No more killing. No more hunting people." "I can't promise that. The hunger." "Then I'll keep feeding you. Once a week, I'll leave supplies at marked locations deep in the wilderness. You stay away from people, away from settlements, and I'll make sure you don't starve." Samuel stared at me for a long time. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm responsible for you now. Because I chose to save you, and that means seeing it through. I paused. And because you're the closest thing I have to a friend. The word hung in the air between us, stark and strange. But it was true. Over the past months, our conversations had become the highlight of my days. I'd shared things with Samuel I'd never told another living soul. About the divorce, about Emily and how I'd failed as a father, about the loneliness that had driven me so deep into these woods. And Samuel had shared its own history, its own terrible loneliness spanning more than a century. We were both monsters in our way. Both outcasts who'd chosen isolation over the messy work of staying human. All right, Samuel said finally. I accept your terms. Feed me and I'll stay hidden. I'll be a ghost. It took me 3 nights to construct the ramp system. Logs and rope arranged carefully so the creature could climb out without my help. I wanted no evidence of my direct involvement if anyone came looking. On the 3rd night, under a moonless sky, I waited at the top while Samuel emerged from the pit for the first time in 6 months. In the open air, it was even more massive than I'd realized, nearly 8 feet tall when it straightened to its full height. But instead of attacking, instead of running, it simply stood there looking around at the forest with something like wonder. Thank you, it said, the words carrying clearly in the still night air. Then it turned and disappeared into the darkness, moving with a speed and grace that seemed impossible for something so large. Within seconds, it was gone, leaving only the faintest trace of its passage. A few broken branches, a print in the soft earth that might have been anything. For the next 12 years, I kept my promise. Every week, I'd hike to one of our predetermined locations. Places so remote I sometimes didn't see another human for months, and leave supplies. Frozen meat, sometimes fresh kills I'd dressed myself. And every week, the food would be gone, replaced by small signs that Samuel had been there. A stone arrangement. A piece of carved wood. Once, incredibly, a flower pressed carefully between 2 pieces of bark. We saw each other rarely, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, always by chance during my patrols. We'd talk for a few minutes, Samuel sharing observations about the changing forest, me updating it on the outside world. The conversations were brief but meaningful. 2 solitary beings checking in, making sure the other was still alive. Tom Erickson never came back to ask questions. The strange sightings continued occasionally, but they were vague enough, rare enough, that they became just another local legend. The Wendigo of the North Woods. The ghost of the ravines. People told stories, but no one took them seriously enough to investigate. I retired from the Forest Service 5 years ago but stayed in the cabin. Couldn't imagine being anywhere else. My daughter visits sometimes, brings my grandson. I tell them about the beauty of the wilderness, about the importance of respecting nature, about how there are more things in these woods than can be easily explained. They think I'm just a sentimental old man. They don't know the truth. Last month, I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Advanced, aggressive, inoperable. The doctors gave me 6 months, maybe less. I've chosen to spend whatever time I have left here in the cabin, surrounded by the forest that's been my home for so long. 2 weeks ago, Samuel came to see me. I was sitting on the porch at sunset, wrapped in a blanket despite the summer warmth, when I heard the familiar sound of something large moving through the underbrush. I didn't reach for my rifle. I knew who it was. Samuel emerged from the tree line and sat down at the edge of my property, keeping a respectful distance. We looked at each other for a long moment, and I was struck by how old it looked. Not physically, the creature seemed ageless, unchanging, but in its eyes. There was a weariness there that hadn't been present before. You're dying, it said. Not a question. Yes. I'm sorry. We sat in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Finally, Samuel spoke again. You saved my life, John Kellerman. Not just from the pit. From loneliness. From forgetting that I was ever human at all. You gave me back a piece of myself I thought was lost forever. I felt tears on my face, warm against my cold skin. You did the same for me. What happens to our arrangement when you're gone? I don't know, I admitted. I suppose you'll have to hunt again. Or find another human foolish enough to befriend a monster. You were never foolish. You were brave, compassionate, human in the best sense of the word. Samuel stood, preparing to leave. I will miss our friendship. As will I. It started to turn away, then stopped. I've been thinking about something you said years ago. About everyone deserving compassion, even if they don't deserve forgiveness. I've spent over a century trying to understand the difference between those two things. I think I finally do. What's the difference? Compassion is what you gave me. Forgiveness is something I'll never deserve, and never asked for. But compassion was enough. It was everything. Samuel disappeared into the darkness then, and I haven't seen it since. But I know it's out there, somewhere in the deep wilderness, surviving as it has for more than 100 years. And I know that our friendship, strange and impossible as it was, changed us both, made us both a little more human in the ways that matter. I'm telling this story now because I think it needs to be told. Because people need to understand that the world is bigger and stranger than we imagine, that compassion doesn't always make sense, that sometimes the monstrous and the human are separated by nothing more than circumstance and choice. And because when I die, probably sometime in the next few weeks, I want someone to know that I didn't waste my life out here in the wilderness. I saved something worth saving. Not just a creature but a soul. And in saving it, I saved something in myself too. The woods are dark now, full of the sounds of life continuing its ancient rhythms. Somewhere out there, Samuel is watching, waiting, surviving. And I'm here, in this cabin that's been my refuge and my prison, finally at peace with the choices I made. Some secrets change you. Some secrets define you. This one did both. And I wouldn't change a single moment of it, even knowing how it ends. Especially knowing how it ends. Because in the end, we're all just looking for someone to see us for what we really are, and love us anyway. Even monsters. Even men who feed them.